Thank you so much for all of you for attending. It's great to see so many people interested in something so current and important. So, just for those of you who've turned up and don't know what the motion is today, the motion is, this House regrets the decision to republish the Charlie Hebdo cartoons. I'm sure you all know what they are and how sensitive this topic is. After I introduce speakers from each side, you can give them a round of applause instead of one each, because there's quite a few and it'll take a while. On side proposition, we have Abdullah al Andalusi, who's an Islamic activist and co-founder of the Muslim Debate Forum. With him, we also have Asad Zaman, who's a local Imam from Manchester and an educationist. And their final speaker is Cochran, who's a European Debating Championship finalist. Big round of applause. And against them, on side opposition, we have Lejla Kurić, who is an activist and writer for Left Foot Forwards. With her, we have our very own Helen Feord, who's a member of the Manchester Debating Union, second-year biology student at the University of Manchester. And with them, we have Jack Mellish, who's chair at the University of Manchester Liberty League, a society which is all about freedom and liberty. He said to explain it, but I'm not sure what it is. I'm sorry. Just a disclaimer, people who are here speaking who are from the Manchester Debating Union do not represent the views of the Manchester Debating Union. They are here to represent a side of an argument that we think is important to reflect for all of you guys to see. So, before we start, the structure for tonight's debate. So we'll have 7-minute opening speeches from each speaker in turn, one from side proposition, then opposition, and so on. During those speeches, I'll be banging the gavel at various occasions. I'll bang it at the first minute to let them know that they should have finished their introductions by then. I'll bang it at the 6 minutes to let them know they have 1 minute left. And then I'll be banging it periodically from the 7-minute onward to be like, you should be finishing speaking by now. After that, we'll have a Q&A session with the audience where you can ask me your questions. If you can try and be brief with your questions and not start a massive back and forward. I know it's frustrating when it's so important to lots of people, but otherwise we can't really get through the entire debate and it just becomes you arguing with someone, which is not what we want. Then we're ending with 2-minute summaries from one speaker from each side who've already been chosen, and we'll be doing the final vote after that. So, before we do get started, if I have it here, as you all entered, you were asked whether you'd like to vote for side proposition, that we should regret the republishing the Charlie Hebdo cartoons, whether you'd like to vote for side opposition, whether you shouldn't regret the republishing the Charlie Hebdo cartoons, or an abstention if you're not sure. So as you came in, the numbers as you came in, for side proposition that we should regret, 62 of you voted. For side opposition that we shouldn't regret it, 100 of you voted. And inside abstention, 49 of you voted. So it's all to play for today in this debate. It could swing either way and make either side win. So without any further ado, if you're all ready, I would like to invite Abdullah al Andalusi to start the debate as a whole. Asad Zaman.
Hi, good evening everyone, and Assalamu alaikum also. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here on this motion. Let me start by saying that no country in the world has absolute freedom of speech as part of its society, something that is acceptable to them. No country. Whether it's a democracy or whether it's a dictatorship, they all have their red lines. But may I start by saying that violence is never justified in retaliation for insult. So let's be very, very clear about that. So this is under no circumstances in any way a defense of the murderous killings that happened in France. And indeed, for us Muslims, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, himself set the example of how you should respond when someone insults you. And there's a classic narration that most Muslims are aware of there was a old woman who used to throw rubbish in his path, the path that he always used to take every day towards the mosque. She knew he was going to be coming at this particular time, and she used to throw rubbish in his path. To irritate him, she had become, as one might say, influenced by the propaganda of the extreme right, as one might say. This is 1400 years ago, of course. And This was a daily thing. And then one day, he noticed there was no rubbish there. So he inquired from the neighborhood, what happened to this old woman? They said she's ill. So he inquired as to where she was. He went to see her and asked of her health. Now she was so amazed. She thought he was going to say something like, this is God's punishment to you because of the way you've treated me. But he said nothing of the sort. He just asked for her, about her health and prayed for her recovery. She was so impressed by this gesture, she actually accepted Islam. Now that, for us, is setting the example of how you should treat insult and those who offend you. Coming back to today, and as I said, no society on the planet, no country on the planet allows absolute freedom of insult, and for good reason. Because if you do allow it, you are heading straight for anarchy. Anyone saying anything about anyone, well, you can just imagine, you're all intelligent people, you can imagine what's going to happen. Imagine if everyone here turned to their right and swore at the person on their right, total, without any provocation, and you meant it. I think we'd have to call the police and some ambulances as a consequence of that. So it's common sense. It's not something that we have to seriously intellectualize. So the question is really for us, and for any society, what kind of society do we want to create? Do we want to create a society which is full of harmony or hate? If it is a society that we want to, well, I'll come to the harmony, but look at the hate. We all know the consequence of allowing hate speech to go ahead and for it not to be regulated or banned. We all know what happened to 6 million Jews because of the hatred that was generated within Nazi society. And we saw the Holocaust, the destruction, the genocide of 6 million Jews because they were Jews. And more recently, we saw what happened when that religious hatred reaches a certain level. 250,000 Muslims in Bosnia were slaughtered because they were Muslims. They were not even, in fact, a minority. And no one knows the pain and suffering of what happened to the Bosnian Muslims, what they went through when 10% of their population was wiped out and slaughtered because they were Muslims, more than Lejla, who is here a Bosnian Muslim. And perhaps she might give you some idea of the horrors she went through. Every society, every religion, every community, every group has its red lines, which if crossed will cause great offence and or will be illegal in order to protect a particular group. Look at this country, for example. The bastion of democracy and free speech. We have laws against racism. If you said the N-word, you could end up behind bars. It's illegal. If you make fun and caricature the slave trade, I don't think black people will be very happy about that. We have laws against anti-Semitism. Holocaust denial. If you say, well, I wasn't around 70 years ago, and I don't believe what the newspapers say, so I don't believe that 6 million Jews died. You are in breach of the law. You could be locked up for saying that. Or anything else anti-Jewish. Homophobia. If you said anything anti-homosexual, something that they don't like, then very clearly we have laws today. The society has changed. We have laws today to ban that. We have libel laws, defamation laws, slander, etc. All of these laws are there to protect groups. They are there to make sure society remains civilized. All of them restrict our freedom of speech. For example, in terms of dictatorships, I said every country has its red lines. I was in Syria studying Arabic about 10 years ago, and I just happened, it's a long story, I'll cut it short. And I came across the chief of police, and I said to him, listen, I'm from England, and I've just come to learn some Arabic, and I don't want to end up behind bars. Tell me where the red lines are. I know in Britain I can say things which I can't say here. He said, you're absolutely right. Don't talk about sex, don't talk about politics, and don't talk about religion. No preaching. I thought, right, no sex, no politics, no religion. I better shut up then. And I'll wind up by saying that, as I said, we all have our red lines, and Muslims have their red line when it comes to the Prophet Muhammad. We love him more than we love our own mothers. We regard him as the greatest human in history. In fact, in terms of freedom of speech regarding this matter, the Pope was asked about this, and he said, you insult my mother, and I'll smack you in the mouth. That is the extent of your freedom of speech. And essentially, I'll come to an end by saying, and I have a lot more I could have said, but essentially, if we want to create a harmonious society, then let us practice responsible freedom of speech and not abuse of freedom of speech. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sam, and I'd like to invite Jack to open up the case for the side of opposition.
Ladies and gentlemen, this debate is not a referendum on the cartoons. It is entirely possible for you as an individual to be deeply offended by the cartoons and vote for the opposition. This debate is and should be about the 12 people who were killed in the production of this cartoon and how we as a society should react. I'll be advancing 2 points tonight. You need to agree with only one of them to vote with side opposition. Firstly, that you, as an individual, deserve to know why those men and women were killed. That any offence these cartoons may cause, it is an imperative that we as a society know their contents. This seems an undeniable case. So, I shall also use the rest of my time to try and convince you not only should these cartoons have been published for journalistic reasons, but in solidarity as well. No doubt not all of you in this room will stand with me and say, Je suis Charlie. That is fine. You need only believe my first claim to vote with the opposition tonight. First, some background. Despite the name of the motion, in the UK, a large number of newspapers would not show the new Charlie Hebdo cover, and no national newspapers would show the cartoons which were produced beforehand, which led to the deaths. There will be people in this room right now who still do not know what was in those cartoons. Nearly the entirety of the British media had been kowtowed into refusing to publish these cartoons by a threat that was entirely unspoken, unlike their European counterparts. This, all of course, was without consulting the vast numbers of French Muslims who were already gathering in solidarity outside the offices of Charlie Hebdo. By caving to these demands before a request of censorship had even been made, by regretting the production of these cartoons, we hand the power to the most radical elements of the Islamic community and surrender more power to exactly the kind of people we don't want holding any. We all know Muslims here, we all have Muslim friends, and we know the vast majority of Muslims in this country are just like you and I. And we would not say of them that they are some greatly aggrieved groups whose sensibilities can never handle a cartoon being published in a newspaper they do not even have to buy. It is the proposition who wishes to infantilise them into this position without even consulting them first. And this represents the glaring flaw that lies at the centre of the proposition's case. They say it inflames tensions and causes offence. To who? Do we believe that had these images been published in British newspapers, there would be now some great gulf between Muslims and the rest of society? No. Perhaps maybe the worst radicals. But do we want to be deciding what we can read, what can be published, what the limits of our society are, based upon the offence of those people? To my first proposition, why is it essential that we know the contents of these cartoons regardless if they do offend people? What value is there in publishing of these cartoons? Firstly, precedent. So we find it valuable to see in front of us the anti-Semitic cartoons which flood out in many places in the world, because we need to see them to understand how viscerally shocking they are in a way a description just does not capture. Note here, we are not terrified of the offence republishing them might cause to a Jewish viewer, because we understand the reporting on them is essential and more important. The proposition fails to tell us why the Islamic Islamic community is such a fragile group that they in comparison must be protected. This is especially true in the Charlie Hebdo case. After the shootings, an important discussion had to be had. Some people call the cartoons just satire, some people call them racist. A lot of people in this room have probably already made up their mind upon which way they lie in this debate. However, the entire cultural discussion that desperately needed to take place as a country was held back by the simple fact that the commentators on either side in many cases in the UK couldn't show the actual pictures. How can you know without first being able to check the principal thing being discussed? So much of whether you believe these cartoons are racist or offensive or just satire is about that gut feeling you get when you first see the cartoons, and that's why it's essential that we got to see them, and that's why we should not regret any newspaper who did take that brave decision to publish those cartoons. Fundamentally, the massacre at the offices of Charlie Hebdo and how we react to it are one of the most essential things we as a society will decide over the coming decades. 12 political commentators were killed for having an opinion and drawing a cartoon. I believe not only do you have the right to know, full, uncensored what that opinion is, but need to know. I believe the need for our society to be able to talk frankly about what is satire, about how we should go about contextualising the grief we hold for the fallen, to decide how we felt about their work, outweighs someone's right to not be offended. Let no one tell you republishing these cartoons has no journalistic value. Free speech is not for the benefit of the writer, but for the benefit of those who might hear their opinion. And we desperately need to understand the opinion of those at Charlie Hebdo, not second-hand, but viscerally in front of us. And in this way, even if we thought the cartoons were the most offensive, racist things we'd ever witnessed, then they should be republished, because that discussion needs to happen and needs to be properly contextualised and informed. And we can only do that when everyone in society is seeing the cartoons, by having them thrust in front of us and forcing us to make up our minds. This is how we as a society move forwards from this tragedy, and that's why we should not regret their republication. While this alone is enough not to regret the republishing, I want to take a step further and say we have a duty to stand in solidarity with Charlie Hebdo, and commend those few newspapers who chose to reprint some previous cartoons for that reason. I concede openly how problematic many of their cartoons are, some of which even I find distasteful. But something must be controversial to be a genuine symbol of solidarity. Otherwise you are simply republishing something you are happy to produce yourself. By standing against terrorism's by standing with Charlie Hebdo, we show our dedication to freedom of the press and our resolve against terrorism's attempts to silence anyone, whether or not we disagree with them. Why do terrorists target small satirist papers who print cartoons of Muhammad? Because it is effective, because they know they can instill fear in our society and silence satire and critique until only the most niche outlets are left brave enough. The people most harmed by this are, of course, the Muslims in countries where it is impossible to publish religious satire for fear of death. Why is it effective? Because when it happens, newspapers do refuse to show the cartoons. If every newspaper was to republish these cartoons, the terrorists would know they cannot silence us and that their tactics are not effective. There is protection together, but because the individual satirists stand alone, they are targeted. Ladies and gentlemen, the good society we seek to build can only be built upon a foundation where everyone is allowed to speak freely, regardless of how objectionable their opinion is. Freedom of speech is meaningless if not for the people who think differently. And when violence is done to someone in our community, regardless of how fringe or disliked they are, whether you as an individual like their opinions or not, it is our duty to rise to their defence. Because when we fail to stand in solidarity, we create a rod for our own back. We all here think our opinions will never be at stake, safe in the comfortable moral majority. Can you be sure of that? Is that a risk you're willing to take? And more importantly, is that a society you want to live in? To say Je suis Charlie is to say I stand for everyone's right to print what they wish without fear of violence. To republish their cartoons in solidarity is to say extremists and terrorists that we will not let you silence people. That if our society is united on one democratic principle, it is this, and that we will defeat you. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope in this short time, even if I have not convinced you to stand in solidarity, I've convinced you that to not surrender the power to the most separatist members of our community. And I've convinced you of the important value seeing these cartoons has to our society. And if you will not join me in support of Charlie Hebdo, you will at least not regret your own ability to make an informed decision on what is the most important issue of the day and vote opposition.
Thank you very much, Jack, and I'd like to invite Abdullah to continue the case.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I greet you all with the Islamic greetings of peace. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May the peace and blessings of God be upon you all. I want to make a point about this discussion today. Today's topic is not actually about freedom of speech. It is not about the Paris attacks, and it's actually not about terrorism. The topic today is not about freedom of speech because all the protagonists involved don't care about freedom of speech. France prosecutes people for criticizing the French anthem or the flag. Hate speech is prohibited even if not inciting violence. We all know about hijabs being banned in schools and the niqab in public in France, and you can't publicly pray in France either. So much for freedom of expression. The comedian Dieudonné has frequently been arrested for his humor and political social criticism in France, and got arrested again after the Charlie Hebdo attacks. Likewise, in the UK, people are prosecuted for burning poppies on Remembrance Day or writing Facebook posts insulting British troops. A Muslim woman was prosecuted for even writing a poem that she never even published. The collection of world leaders who turned up after the Paris shootings were a veritable who's who of repressive anti-free speech politicians and de facto dictators. Charlie Hebdo even believes in self-censorship when they fired one of their editors for doing a cartoon that was deemed too risque and anti-Semitic. So not even Charlie Hebdo believes in free expression for its own artists. France disingenuously spun the criminal acts of a few into a civilizational conflict and an existential threat to Western way of life, despite the fact that celebrities, comedians, journalists, political dissenters, and media pundits throughout the Western countries just normally are routinely threatened by wackos for expressing their opinions, or harassed by the state and even jailed under trumped-up charges for expressing their opinions, like Dieudonné and even more than 40 other people in the wake of the attacks, showing that the issue is not about terrorism or the threat of violence threatening free speech. The biggest threats to free speech are various Western governments, not a few angry people with guns. We've always had a few angry people with guns. In recent times, many people have been shot and killed for expressing unpopular or controversial opinions, like Northern Irish journalists against the IRA, and they were shot by the IRA. In USA, people are attacked by mafia or just criminals or just their neighbors for criticizing them or insulting them. We see that even the Swiss Nazi Wilhelm Gustloff before World War II was shot by a Jewish student for distributing false propaganda against the Jewish community called the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which the Nazis then claimed was evidence of the Jewish community's threat to free speech of Europeans. Where have we heard that before? By saying that someone is killed, some being killed for what they say is a threat to free speech, it's like saying someone being killed for a crime of passion is an existential threat to the Western concept of reproductive rights. The question we are all here to ask ourselves is, do we regret the republishing of Charlie Hebdo magazine? Not should it be banned or should we use any illegal measures. That's not being discussed. We're discussing wisdom, we're discussing whether we should regret. Now, Charlie Hebdo was no mild-mannered magazine. If any of you has seen the cartoons it draws, it could give the Nazi magazine Der Stürmer a run for its money. While most of the cartoons used are grossly offensive and gratuitously designed to provoke insult lacking any intellectual substance, and I've actually looked at the inside of the front cover, not just the front cover, but the actual insides of it from a free copy you can find mass-produced online. Its cartoons against Islam and Muslims were particularly vitriolic compared to other religions. In fact, it overly focused on Islam and Muslims, playing upon stereotypes of Muslims being evil, violent, barbaric, and genuinely inciting hate against an already beleaguered French Muslim minority. Its cartoons were so vile and borderline inciting that a teenager who merely copied one of the front covers of Charlie Hebdo, which showed a Muslim Brotherhood demonstrator being shot to death in Egypt, with the mocking label, "The Quran is crap, it doesn't stop bullets." All he did was he merely substituted the Quran for a Charlie Hebdo magazine and substituted a Muslim man for a French cartoonist, and he was arrested for justifying terrorism. And he just literally copied the front cover of the Charlie Hebdo magazine, but instead of making it Muslims, he made it Charlie Hebdo themselves, and he was arrested. So much for free speech. There'll be no demonstrations for that guy. My argument is simple. We're not here to question whether Charlie Hebdo has a right to publish cartoons, nor whether France or the UK governments are hypocritical, but we ask whether it is right and wise, and if it is not, shouldn't we regret the lack of wisdom and tact? The intellectual founding father of liberalism, John Locke, said that every man has commission to admonish, exhort, convince another of error by reasoning, and to draw him to truth. And we all agree, open criticism of everything. There is no taboos in what you can intellectually criticize. My organization, Muslim Debate Initiative, we invite the BNP to criticize Islam. We've given them platforms where no one else would give them a platform, because we believe in freedom to intellectually criticize. But John Locke also said that we should carry with our exhortations no rough usage of word or action whereby the ejected person may anywise be damnified in body or estate. Voltaire also said, Voltaire, again, famous free speech philosopher, he said, I hate calumny so much that I do not even want to impute foolishness to the Turks, although I detest them as tyrants over women and enemies of the arts. Now, I disagree with that comment, but even Voltaire saying that he detests calumny, even to say something about a civilization it might be misled about, but he believes we're very bad in their practices. So he didn't want to even impute foolishness. He didn't think it to be wise. Denis Diderot said secular intolerance consists in completely ostracizing and in chasing through all sorts of violent means those that think differently from us about God and his cult. It is impious to expose a religion to the odious imputations of tyranny or hardness or injustice or unsociability, even in the goal of bringing back those that might have strayed away from the truth. So just because we can do something doesn't mean that we must do it. Surely a better society is one where people choose to refrain of their own volition from insults, demonization, and other such behaviors best confined to the playground. Lastly, I argue that we should regret the republishing of the cartoons because they were not only unnecessary, but they led, unfortunately, to deaths and destruction, resulting in riots, including 2 Muslim deaths in Europe and 10 people across the world, and many buildings were destroyed, and unfortunately some churches were destroyed too. I say this because Australian comedians Mel Gregg and Michael Christian called a hospital as part of a prank, and they fooled a nurse into finding out the medical condition of Kate Middleton during her pregnancy. The nurse was so humiliated and shamed by the prank, she committed suicide. Were the comedians at fault for the suicide? No. Were they within their free speech rights to make such a prank? Yes. But did they end up regretting it? Yes. I urge you all to put a line underneath the destruction and death that resulted from republishing the cartoons, and a vote that this House regrets the publishing of the cartoons. And it is not a vote against free speech, but in fact a vote for wisdom, compassion, and editorial discretion in the exercise of it. As Mark Twain said, we have 3 benefits: freedom of speech, freedom of thought, and the wisdom never to use either. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Abdullah. I'd like to invite Lejla Kurić to continue the case beside the opposition.
Thank you. I would like to tell you that yes, I am Charlie, and I'm not just Charlie Hebdo, but all of them. Let me explain. If liberty means anything at all, it means the right to tell people what they do not want to hear. These are words by George Orwell, and they ring very true, or true as ever, following Charlie Hebdo's massacre. Free speech, the right to challenge, criticize, and even ridicule ideas and deeply held beliefs is essential human right. Without it, human progress is impossible. There is no robust debate if somebody somewhere is not offended. It is also a backbone of liberal democracy. Unfortunately, in this country, many liberals have forgotten this. Instead, they have embraced this culture of self-censorship on the basis that now we live in a multicultural society and we must avoid offending any particular group of people. But what could be more racist than assume that only white Westerners can criticize religious doctrines, or that only white Westerners can handle satire without bursting into murderous rage. This inability to stand up for basic liberal values has enabled Muslim extremists to operate unchallenged in Western world, and it also has betrayed liberals and liberal progressive elements in Muslim communities, both in the West and Middle East. What happened to Charlie Hebdo is horrific. However, we must remember that there are journalists, writers, activists in Middle East, South Asia, North Africa who are struggling for freedoms and democratic rights, and they face this kind of danger every single day of their life. Reactionaries would like you to believe that that they are the only authentic voices from within Muslim community. They're not. Police officer who died defending Charlie Hebdo officers was Muslim. Also, following the attack, there has been messages of solidarity in liberal Arabic press. There was outrage as well, but there was also solidarity, also in Turkish press, even in Pakistan to extent. They have to play it very carefully. And I cannot emphasize enough how much courage would it take for them to do that. Of course, religious fundamentalists are attacking free speech, not because they are fragile people who can't possibly handle offense like everybody else has to in their lives, but because they understand that free speech is a backbone of liberal democracy and their instincts are totalitarian. And we are fortunate enough to live in this country where we could be asked to self-censor because we need to be polite. But of course, if we lived in a different country, what could happen to us if we transgressed these limits of free speech that are set out? We could be accused of blasphemy, we could be arrested, tortured, and executed. And this is not exaggeration. This is exactly what is happening from Somalia to Pakistan and beyond. The most crucial thing to understand about Charlie Hebdo about Charlie Hebdo affair is that it's not just about Charlie. It is about all of the Charlies. It is about Raif Badawi, Saudi blogger who is sentenced to 1,000 lashes and 10 years in prison for allegedly insulting Islam. His crime was to make a website where people can discuss religion. This is also about Sohail Arabi, Iranian man, who is currently on a death row and is going to be hanged because he allegedly insulted Prophet on Facebook. It's also about Roya Nabak, a woman from Stockport who went to visit her family in Iran, and she was arrested for allegedly insulting Islam on Facebook, and she might be executed, and we can't do anything about it because we don't have diplomatic relations with Iran. It is also about Asia Bibi, a Pakistani woman who has been on 5 years now on a death row for allegedly insulting Islam. It's about Salman Taseer, Pakistani politician who was gunned down for opposing blasphemy laws. It's about 51 people who were killed by vigilante mobs because they were accused of blasphemy. And this is about all of those people whose lives were destroyed, who were murdered because they said something that somebody thought is offensive and they deserve to die for it. And it is our moral duty to stand with all of them, all of the Charlies. And obviously the ones I just mentioned, they are just some well-known cases. We could be here whole night reading their names. The more we agree with this notion that offensive speech is unacceptable, more will people seize, or certain people will seize on this opportunity to be offended about this thing or the other thing, and more aggressive and deadly their outrage will become. And they will not stop until no worldview can be expressed but their own. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leah, and I'd like to invite Doug to continue the case side proposition.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This debate is not about two things. I think we've made that clear down the proposition bench today. It is not about the permissibility of murder, over which there is no debate. And I mean that both morally and factually. I mean that morally in the sense that no right-thinking person could ever think that these cartoons were a justification, an excuse, or even a plea in mitigation for an act of violence. But I also mean that factually. I mean that factually in that there is no one here, I think we can safely assume, who is unpersuaded of the moral abhorrence of murdering cartoonists, even for offensive cartoons. So I think you should dismiss as quite cynical of the opposition their attempt to say that this is about, as I believe the first speaker from the opposition, as he put it, this is about the deaths of 12 people. In no way is it. It's about the prudent exercise of our freedom of speech. Now, I don't happen to believe, and I hope that you would agree with me in saying that there is anyone or any government or authority competent or who possesses or ought to possess the right to restrain legally, physically or otherwise what we should or should not say. But that doesn't oblige us to say everything. Our freedom of movement, however unrestrained, doesn't require us to go everywhere. And in terms of freedom of speech, I suggest there are certain places we don't, and indeed we shouldn't, go. And that is precisely the point that we make today in proposition. I think it's quite a simple point, but I think it's one that's often overlooked in this discussion, that offence is wrong. Now, sometimes there are occasions where offence is the price we pay to say something very important. Your doctor may need to encourage you to lose weight. But I hope, ladies and gentlemen, you do not take that limited use of something that is potentially offensive for a beneficial end to be a general principle that it's okay to walk up to people on the street and say, you're fat, you're fat, you're fat. I hope none of you do that. But that's because you know something quite simple. The fact that you are free and unrestrained and will face no legal compulsion if you do so to restrain yourself doesn't mean it's a good idea. It is hurtful and harmful. It's just not very nice. Now, it's very difficult, I think, for those of us like myself who aren't Muslims, sometimes to understand quite the depth of offence that many Muslims take with the depiction of Muhammad. I'm a Christian, and I don't particularly take the same degree of offence to depictions of Jesus. But, ladies and gentlemen, many of you may not be religious yourselves and may find the entire category of religious offence and blasphemy to be inaccessible and difficult to understand. But I would put it to you that when someone says, this is the thing I care about most in the world. This is my religion. This to me is my connection to God himself and to the purpose of life. For you or me or anyone else to say we regard that as an object of ridicule, we despise that. Not that we critique it, not that we question with it, but we take the things that you hold sacred and mean to defile them by every means at our disposal. That's a disgusting thing to do to someone. It's far more damaging than to say that they're fat. And I would put it to you that none of you would even dream of doing that much. So why should we be calling all of this? Why should we be causing all of this offence? Various justifications have been given, both in this debate and elsewhere. One of the reasons was given by the speaker who spoke first for the opposition today, which is that we need to understand why. But we just don't. We don't need to understand why in terms of forming an opinion about the limits of free speech. I mean, I have opinions on the legal permissibility of hardcore pornography, but I don't need to consume it to hold those opinions. We don't need to look at this stuff to know how we feel about it. If necessary, we could verbally describe these cartoons to the extent to which you could be informed, but I put it to you this way: I don't think any of you have come into this debate thinking, I have no idea even where to begin. Like, what cartoons? What could they possibly have been about? There isn't this wall of silence around the issue, ladies and gentlemen. This has been the most publicised event possibly in global history over the past 5 years or so. The analogy was made to anti-Semitic cartoons, and the suggestion was made that this was a bit like portraying anti-Semitic cartoons, so we could revile the whole horror of these cartoons by their presentation in the British press. I would make two observations. The first is that Muslims generally express that all depictions of their prophet are blasphemous or are disrespectful, not to be made. So the offence comes in the presentation itself. But the greater point I would make is that that's simply not the context in which these cartoons are reproduced. It might be something different if opposition were saying we should reproduce all of these cartoons with editorials talking about how they're completely unacceptable. That isn't the way they're being presented by the Western press if and when they choose to publish them. They are published alongside Je suis Charlie. That's a very important distinction. There was equally, I thought, a rather bizarre suggestion that this would lead us to believe, if we self-censored ourselves and didn't publish this stuff, that we believed Muslims were incapable of taking offence. Well, I mean, that they were some sort of a soft touch and different from other groups, but I find that the perspective genuinely bizarre, that as we looked around in society and looked for a group and said, they haven't had their full share of demonisation lately, that we decided to pick on British Muslims. We need to make sure they're getting their fair share. I find that perspective, frankly, ridiculous. The justification offered today, both by the opposition and in the popular press, is that this is satire, which we're meant to conflate as being good. Now, satire can, and often does, produce a more nuanced critique of things. It often does help us to think differently. But the fact that satire can do those things is not the same as saying it does do those things. Portraying Muslims as terrorists, or drawing the face of a black politician on a monkey, as Charlie Hebdo tended to do, probably didn't invite people to a more nuanced and thoughtful view of the world. It was done precisely because it was offensive. It wasn't as though Charlie Hebdo was in the business of making really interesting critiques about society and occasionally trended into offence. It selected what was offensive first and used criticism as a post hoc justification. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to conclude by saying that there was a suggestion on the opposition that we were wrong in suggesting this would create a great gulf between Muslims and wider society here in Great Britain. I don't know how great the gulf would be, but the thing that these terrorists believed when they shot up the Charlie Hebdo offices, what they wanted the rest of the world to believe, and what they wanted their fellow Muslims to believe, was that there are only two choices in society. There are people who respect your religion and your faith, and there are people who have no respect for it. And the only way to manifest that respect is by lashing out at the second group. What we say on proposition is there is a third way, there is a better way, which is to exercise free speech in a way that respects everyone. That's why we propose this motion. Thank you very much.
I'd like to invite Helen to continue the case beside the opposition.
Okay. I think it's quite hard to come up after 5 speakers and go, oh, we need to reframe the debate, this is what the debate is about. However, I think that there's a few things that we should talk about before we engage with it. First of all, this happened in France, and I know that a speaker on the side proposition talked about how there is a lot of insults that happen in France and things like that. Yes, it's true, the Front National does have 20% of the vote and stuff like that. But we feel, however, that because a magazine such as Charlie Hebdo exists in France along with other ones, it might be therefore a product of the actual problems in France itself, less than just the problems that the magazine has as itself. Also, before the shootings, it only had about 300 people that actually read the magazine. So the fact that, like, oh, this is like the whole entire view and they're like broadcasting all these views across France is false, because very few people actually knew the existence of this thing before the shootings. So after the Charlie Hebdo attacks, which took place earlier this year, media across the world republished the cartoons from this newspaper. And I say this, most European newspapers would do this, some didn't, and these include some of the British ones. What I want to bring to you today is the fact that the decision to republish in the society was a good way to engage with what had happened and to therefore bring a debate and an argument into society, therefore people can talk about it, people can see it, and people can understand and make up their own opinions and not just believe what the wider part of media are talking about, and why it is important to have a discussion in society on this basis. So while I was doing some research on this debate, I came across this phrase in this blog. It's like defending free speech and free press rights, which typically means defending the right to disseminate the very ideas society finds more repellent. So while I'm not saying we should go around criticizing every single Muslim, what I'm saying is that people have like the right to like pick up on ideas in society. They have a right to pick up on religion in society, which does have a massive impact on our society today. I'm not just talking about Muslim, but all the other societies that we have today. And be able to have an opinion and to decide whether or not they want values to integrate into their society and the way they live their lives themselves. So I'm not here to have a one-sided argument about whether we should continue to publish criticism of the Muslim religion and culture, or that these attacks demonstrate the terrorism potential of this culture. This is neither the point nor the truth. What we bring to you today is the fact that it's important to continue to uphold the ability to dissect, criticize, and in general hold an argument about something in society. So basically seeing like why it is hypocritical to say, no, we shouldn't republish this, while thousands of people in France are demonstrating against all these people, these 12 people that died. About how this has like created a norm to republicize this, and in this way pick up on the people that are not republicizing it, and how this like brings the need of like individual questioning, and like people can therefore have an opinion on how things are being done. Okay, so why the symbolism of this, of the republication of these cartoons is important, and shows that like people that don't do it is like slightly hypocritical. So 12 people died in the Charlie Hebdo shooting. So 12 people lost their lives using their freedom of speech. In a very simplistic view of this situation, the republication of the cartoons are more to show the concern after the useless loss of the lives, and to show how no person deserves to die of the publication of radical opinions. This is a given. I'm sure everybody in this room agrees with that. I think Proposition also conceded that. But the problem that we have is that going beyond the actual content of the cartoons, it's important to state that this should be republicized within mainstream newspapers and magazines, so that this never happens again, so that the wave of republication can be seen as an ultimate way to show the sympathy for the dead. So, because 4 million people demonstrated in the streets of France on the weekend following the shooting, that many international political leaders and joined the families of the victims that they walked to remember the dead. By condemning the republishing of the cartoons, we show hypocrisy in this respect. Is that, yeah, people are mourning the loss of these people. People are using the Je suis Charlie slogan on social media. And by not republishing it, by not recognizing that these people had an opinion, but people that people did say these things, it is basically allowing Western media to go, oh, we don't agree with the fact that we don't agree with the fact that people died and this is wrong. We just feel like shoving this into the distance isn't going to help. This moves on to the next thing I'd like to talk about how the fact that this creates a norm in the republication. Okay. So, because most European newspapers republish the cartoons, we have in this respect a sort of norm of the republication, which meant that all the British media that didn't do it all had to back up why they didn't. So because people were talking about why they were publishing, why we should show support towards these, why they show support towards the journalists that dies and things like that, it brought up an issue where a lot of British newspapers had to give out press release and stuff like that. We are not doing this because, however, we do support this, that, and the other. One of the reasons, and I think Jack talked about a bit, was about the fact that people are scared about showing the cartoons, but they still think that it's a good idea to not condone what happened in France. The decision to republish therefore allowed a general consensus to condemn the actions of the terrorists. And if this didn't happen, if we didn't republish it, there'd be sort of like a whitewash view of what actually happened. A whitewash view of what Charlie Hebdo stood for, a whitewash view of like what thing. We don't want like a 10-year-old to like go, oh, these people died because they're saying really, really bad things. No, they want to be able to like have people that can go out and understand and see and understand what it says and then discuss. If you don't bring it back into society, if you don't bring out, then people can't have an opinions against the racism. They can't have opinions like, oh, the cartoons were a bad idea. No, they need to be able to like say, oh, we think that this, that, and the other, and because they can have an argument in this way and understand it themselves, they can therefore have a general argument within society and not just believe what the media are saying. So, what I brought to you is basically that like our ability to continue questions the way in which society functions is so important. If you don't republish it, if you don't show what happened, if you don't let people have their own opinions, if you don't let people like analyse it and see it for themselves, then how on earth are we supposed to advance? How are people supposed to see the situation afterwards and go, oh, actually, this shouldn't have happened or this should have happened. I agree, I don't agree. And therefore, how are you supposed to advance society without being able to question yourself as an individual to be able to do that thing? The Charlie Hebdo shootings must not be buried under a wave of denial. We would not have like a blank understanding of what they stood for. Charlie Hebdo is a magazine full of pictures and stuff like that. It's not just about like, oh, intellectuals in society having a debate about it. It's about people being able to see what happened, understand the loss of human life, and be able to integrate that together. So for this, we beg you to vote for side opposition.
Thank you very much to Helen. Now we move on to the question and answer session. I see you're very keen for the debate. If you're all right to stop talking and maybe you'll be able to hear what I say. Thank you very much. That's lovely of you. In this section, if you ask a short question, I must stress short question, I know we're all keen to talk about it. If you ask a short question, direct it to a member of our panel, I'll allow everyone to respond to it as well. So who would have a question for side proposition or opposition or just a general question? Yes, very keen.
Hi, bonjour. I think that, I'm French and I studied here for 4 years and I kind of came here just to see what was going on because it's a French topic and even though my opinion is, I have my own, I think that both camps didn't understand what Charlie Hebdo was. Charlie Hebdo takes the piss out of French politicians, out of every single ethnical minority and also people like me. They take the crap out of people like me and I don't really care, to be honest. If you go to France, if you read a political magazine, you might even think it's a people's magazine because that's how French people is. We don't really kind of take all these things so seriously. And I like the quote the first speaker said that about the Pope and stuff. But Julius Caesar said, "At Rome, do as the Romans." And so why don't we all have this kind of fast perspective of what they do and just leave it to them and live along and just continue ignoring that kind of things that happened. Thank you.
Ok, merci pour votre question. Je parle français aussi. Bonsoir, pas bonjour. Now, I know that some people hide behind the argument that, oh, this is French culture, we just, take the mick out of everybody. But the issue is not really, it's not about taking the mick or insulting. If you, in some ways, if people actually saw the actual kind of cartoons that was depicted in Charlie Hebdo, it's preponderance against Muslims and Islam, and it's generating of certain stereotypes of Muslims being a threat, or violent, or barbaric and idiotic, and so on. In the social context of France, where you have women are not allowed to wear what they want in public. Muslim women are allowed to wear what they want in state-funded education. Muslims can't pray outside in the French Republic. I think one French councillor said that serve all children pork, and if Muslim children don't like it, they can starve. And this is acceptable discourse in France. You can't say, well, we're free to insult. I would dare say that Charlie Hebdo would probably be banned under a lot of the English laws if it was actually published in England. So it's really a peculiarity of French law which permits attacks against certain minorities because it doesn't go against French customs. You can't insult the French flag. You can't insult the French anthem. So as I said, France, you can't say, we insult everything. No, you can't, and you don't in France. So my point is this: either be consistent. If they were genuinely consistent, said you can literally insult anything, you can demonize anyone, any community, black, white, red, Jew, Muslim, whatever. Then I say, right, fine, fair dues. But because you don't, because France is very selective, and because of the situation of demonization of Muslims, they become second-class citizens in France. I merely argue it's just not wise, right? And so I don't argue for banning. I don't argue. I'm not here to say that the state should decide what is right or wrong. Although the state does decide what is right and wrong in France and UK. I'm merely saying, is it wise in the context of what's happening in France? Now, just to quote John Stuart Mill, where John Stuart Mill was supporting free speech, the biggest defenders of free speech. Yet he said that when there's an angry mob outside a corn dealer, an angry mob are angry about, let's say, corn prices and poverty and so on, that you shouldn't incite them, the angry mob against corn dealers when they're right outside the corn dealer's house, and they're angry, knowing what would happen. And likewise, in France, the Muslim community are very abused. Many French Muslims have actually come to England saying that they can't take the way they're treated in France. So in that environment, I would say exercise some discretion, much as I would say that in pre-World War II Switzerland, there was no persecution of Jews in Switzerland pre-World War II, but there was anti-Semitism in the culture, anti-Semitism in France at the same time, and we saw very nasty things said about Jews in France and in Switzerland. So unfortunately, Europe has a very poor track record of dealing with minorities. And I think maybe when we look at history and we say never again, let's say never again, not never again for the same minority.
Yeah, but the thing is that...
Excuse me, sorry, we need time for everyone to respond, I do apologise, but Asad.
I'll keep it short. I agree with you that the best response would be to ignore it. Because what these people do, first of all, we would never justify it. And by talking about it and by demonstrating, openly, and because of what happened, their readership went up from 60,000 to 5 million. So, in the circumstances, the best thing is to just ignore it, but at the same time, inform the public. You see, the problem with Muslims in France is they have no power at all. They may be almost 10% of the population, but they are completely disempowered. And so much is said about them, and they cannot reply, whereas of course, other minorities like the Jews and others, they have power and they can do things at a political level which Muslims cannot. And therefore, as I said eloquently, that unfortunately we cannot defend ourselves whereas others can, and therefore there should be one law for everyone and it should not be applied selectively.
No. Oh, yeah, no, just to add, I would associate myself with Abdullah on this, but I mean, just to say, if these cartoons could only be understood within the particular context of French society, then they should be republished here. We don't have that context.
Thank you. Jack.
So I think the way in which they talk about offence to the Muslim community is as a fine American President George W. Bush described, the soft bigotry of low expectations. You notice how the first speaker there described Muslims in comparison to an angry mob who couldn't be incited any further. Look, there are lots of oppressed groups in the world, and we think it's probably fine to take the piss out of them in a culture in which satire is good, because, and we think broadly it's unfair to say, well, if we just publish these cartoons, no Muslims could ever possibly stand this. I mean it's unreasonable to make that claim about a large group of people. So, for example, myself and Helen brought our copies of Charlie Hebdo, and we were ushered to put them away because, you know, there might be a riot in this room because the Muslims might see the Charlie Hebdo and then they'll all go crazy. And I can see the chair currently cringing now at the very idea. But this is the way in which Muslims are treated by people who are claiming to advocate for their own position. Which is to say that we can't possibly control ourselves if someone makes fun of us. And notice also the additional semi-veiled threat that is in there, right? We're an angry mob. If you republish these, well, we can't control what's going to happen. So I think when they talk about offence, I don't think it's unreasonable to say just because you're an oppressed group within a country doesn't mean we can't ever write any satire about you. Like there would be whole swathes of people within the country that we couldn't do satire about. And that's an important part of being part of a culture, and in a way an important part of being integrated into that culture is that satire can be made about you as well.
Oh, sorry, Leia.
Well, Charlie Hebdo are portrayed for some reason as some sort of racist magazine where, from what I can see, they are leftist magazines who fought for rights of immigrants. They actually fought for rights of illegal immigrants, and they wanted all illegal immigrants to get their papers in France. Now, what kind of racist would do that sort of thing? One thing that I do understand, they are anti-theists, so they don't like religion, and I have seen they have attacked almost every religion, and I can understand for believer that could upset them. But then, you know, we all have to deal in life with things that we don't like or don't agree or possibly upset us. And this idea that I must admit I don't know what exactly is the situation for Muslims in France. But this idea that somehow oppression leads to aggressive behavior and extremism, I don't believe that is true. Because as the first speaker said, I'm a person from Bosnia. We were subjected to genocide. If that theory held, I would be a psychopath. Now I would be, I don't know, going and shooting Charlie Hebdo myself. If that reasoning holds, it doesn't. We all have to accept that we live in plural society where people can express different. Some people are believers, some people are non-believers, and they both have right to express their worldview. That's it.
I don't have like that much to add. Having grown up in France myself, I can tell you that the French have a particular way of dealing with criticism and stuff like that. And like having studied literature, like every period of time, they will be able to like criticize and look at things and dissect things. And this is going to happen whatever works. And at this point in time, Muslims are unfortunately they're either the target of Charlie Hebdo, other magazines will target other minorities and things like that. And the problem that we have in France is that we have that historic problem with Algeria, and I think that there's nothing much, as she says, there will always be criticisms and always stuff, and I think it also goes back, as you said, like, yeah, French like to make fun of each other. It's true, and I know that having lived there, but unfortunately, but I think that's just something that's inherent to like French culture, and unfortunately, historically, there is a problem that with the Muslims not being able to be that powerful in France, and why that needs to change. It's not necessarily Charlie Hebdo's fault because they're just a vision of society. They're not the ones controlling it.
Thank you. Any other questions through the sides? Yes, in the striped on.
Hi. I do agree with the fact that Muslim friends have a particular position, but you talked about consistency in the fact that every religion in France, you can't just go and wear something that tells about religion. Any people that any religion can't pray. So it's not about Muslim in general, it's a general thing. So about consistency, on that point, is consistent. It's not about what, it's not the topic today, it's not about French laws and how we consider Muslims. I just had a question concerning free speech. How would you say how this is offensive, this is not, we should publish this, we shouldn't publish this? Where are the limits? Who would pose the limits? Who would say this is something that we should publish, this is something that is right? Who would do that? So every religion has special beliefs. How would you, without having still the idea of free speech, how would you, do you understand my question? How do you set the limits, really?
Yeah. We're not discussing the limits today. We're discussing, in terms of banning or laws, repeating it again, we're discussing wisdom, whether it's wise or not, and we're doing it via a forum which is completely voluntary, a debate at a university, of which there will be no legal ramifications emanating, but rather intellectual persuasion and maybe opinion changing. That is how we do it. That's how the philosophers Voltaire and Diderot viewed it, and this is how we're trying to do it now. And this is my point. Just to be very clear, when I use the example of the angry mob is France, is the French population. The Muslim minority are the ones who are beleaguered in France. They're not the angry mob. The Muslim community in France, they're the ones who face discrimination, who face hate incited against them, and they are the corn dealers. And I'm saying now that in front of this angry mob of Front National, fascist, party, the biggest percentage of the power in France, we should exercise some discernment. You can't say, well, French culture, hey, they just like to insult everyone, unless you're a comedian or Dieudonné or the number 40 other arrests of people who were arrested after Charlie Hebdo, who expressed, and the cartoonists who parodied Charlie Hebdo. That's not true. In France, you can't insult anyone, and that's the point. It is, let's not make France say, hey, in France people do this. No, they don't. That's the whole point. It's selective. Let's not lionize the French culture. French culture protects French culture. What is viewed to be foreign to France is free game for insult, demonization, and so on. And France has had a history of this spreading back centuries, unfortunately. And I'll say one more point. My colleague over there says that the Bosnians suffered genocide and we didn't become violent. Well, yes, you did. You fought against the Serbs. You resisted. You armed yourselves when the UN tried to ban gun imports. You fought against the Serbs. But I'm not arguing for the issue of violence. I'm just making a point here. Is that we just have to exercise wisdom, and the oppositions exercise wisdom today when they decided not to bring the Charlie Hebdo magazine. So they themselves believe that it's not wise to just because you have a right to do it, that you must do it. So even they agree with us, even by the demonstration today. So all I'm saying is agree with that agreement. Agree with what they've said. There's one particular issue, which is that just because you can do something doesn't mean that you should do it. And today we're just discussing people to exercise their own voluntary restraint and discretion, and considering the political circumstances, and that's what we're saying.
The question addressed issues of boundaries between offence, and there often are hard calls. This isn't a hard call. We know it's going to be offensive. If we know it's going to be offensive, then the second question we should ask is, what legitimate end are we pursuing through that level of offence? And I don't see a legitimate end in the republication of these cartoons.
Asad. Consistency, someone talked about, and I echo what Abdullah has just said, that in terms of cartoons, for example, if every cartoon was allowed about anyone or anything, that's absolutely fine, but it isn't. I think just, was it recently that it was a cartoon about South Kozi's son becoming a Jew in order to make money, or marrying a Jew in order to make money, and it was satire. It was banned. This is France, and it was banned. So it's consistency. A few years ago, Charlie Hebdo, I think you mentioned it earlier, they did a cartoon about something or other. Somebody didn't like it. The person who drew it, very famous, he was sacked by Charlie Hebdo. So consistency. We say we don't like this. Take the example of Dieudonné you mentioned, just to repeat that. He's irreverent and he's provocative. So is Charlie Hebdo, irreverent and provocative. But Charlie Hebdo is backed by the state, and Udone is condemned and locked up. So where's the consistency? You either have one law for everyone, let everyone abuse everyone, and be treated equal under the law, or you don't. You don't just look at, well, this person's got political power, they've got that sort of lobby behind them, and those people don't have a lobby behind them, so we can treat them as we like. This stuff is in bad taste because there is a lobby behind it, but you guys, freedom of speech, you better, you know, as someone said in Rome, there was a Roman zoo, that stuff is thrown at those who are weak. And it's in bad taste, so you know, it's not allowed, it's for those who have power.
All right, yeah, okay. So, very quickly on this sort of rights debate, that side is saying it's really horrible the way in which the Islamic community is treated in France in terms of their rights being oppressed, headdress being banned, public prayer being banned. But the implicit argument that they then attach to that is that because that happens, we should then also ban critiques of Islam. So rather than them both saying, well, why can't they cross the side with us and say everyone should be free to print everything, rather than we should also be allowed to use the apparatus of the state to inflict violence upon people and stop them from saying what they want. More importantly, what this actually is about, because this is a regret motion that no one here is talking about whether we should ban it, we're talking about whether we as individuals should decide whether it is offensive or not and should not be produced. And Doug's entire speech was predicated on the idea that there actually is no value to us reprinting those cartoons. I mean, I assume from the number of people who are here, we feel there is some value in the discussion of these cartoons, and that discussion would actually be facilitated by us being able to see what those cartoons are, rather than just having them described to us. It also is useful in the stand of solidarity that it takes, in that it helps those grieving families and the people of France who are grieving for the loss of these journalists, and it also shows solidarity that radicals cannot silence people, and it's important that we show those cartoons in solidarity, because we aren't just saying that you can't silence people we agree with. When we show those cartoons, even if we don't agree with them, we are saying you cannot silence anyone. It is that side who wants to silence both people who disagree with them and maintain that apparatus of silence and oppression upon Muslims within France. It is our side who say everyone should be free to print what we want, and when people take violence against you for doing that, it is important that we publish that in solidarity to say to give out the clear message that that is not an acceptable course of action, and that we stand with those people. That's the value you get from republishing those cartoons, and that's why our point still stands.
Well, there is no way that we could define what is offensive in any objective terms. It is always subjective, and this is why it can never be some kind of a way of limiting, of using what is offensive to limit free speech, because it is not objective, it's completely subjective. What is offensive to one person is not offensive to another person. And when it comes to blasphemy, every religion blasphemes against every other religion. So this is it's a pointless argument. And I would like to second it. Yes, there are inconsistencies, but we should argue for more free speech, not for less. We should say, well, okay, yes, or people should be able to say things that are that we disagrei with. For example, we have in this country EDL. And I think they are a bunch of twats, but I would oppose any attempt to prescribe them, because I think they do have their own rights. Although, and also I would equally oppose any. Our government was recently trying to introduce this idea where they could criminalize extremist speech. I mean, how do you define extremist speech? We need to oppose all of these things. Whether they say, oh well, because this is bound, this is allowed, we should have more restriction. No, we should have less restrictions.
Oh.
of misunderstanding what's offensive and what isn't, and therefore having a lot of misunderstanding in that perception. That's.
Okay, fair enough. We, unfortunately, very short time. We have time for one last question. Does anyone have a question for side opposition? They've all been multiples here. Yes, in the corner there. Yeah, the great jacket.
I just have 2 points that this side of the House raised, and I don't think you really directly dealt with the issue. And one was about consistency. That the French government, Charlie Hebdo, you know what freedom of speech for them, but when it comes to critiquing the French anthem or something like that, the French government doesn't allow that. And the second point is that or it seems like Holocaust or anything like that. And the second point I want you to discuss was the point of wisdom. Where's the wisdom in this critiquing and attacking the Christian community?
So on, are we going down the line, or I don't know what we're doing?
Absolutely.
Right. Okay. On the first point, it is that side that says the Islamic community is oppressed in France by its laws. Therefore, we should be able to continue to use those laws, but to oppress other people so everyone is equally oppressed. It's this side who says maybe French Muslims should be allowed to pray in public, and also we should be able to print mean cartoons about them at the same time. The consistency stands on our side, rather than on the side that says we're against the oppression of Muslims, unless we can also use that state apparatus to stop them saying offensive things about us. In terms of the other point was on the wisdom point. So we think there is wisdom in reproducing those cartoons, because after the Charlie Hebdo shootings, we feel if you didn't reproduce those cartoons, it would have been very easy for the media to just lionise Charlie Hebdo as these freedom fighters who were fighting against Islam, who were then just killed. When you actually see the cartoons, you're able to have that critical look at them and that thought process that you don't get when you see the cartoons. So we think there is actually a public good to showing these cartoons, because you need to be able to see the cartoons to understand them fully and to understand why they're wrong. And the idea that these editorials didn't exist. There were loads of editorials discussing the problems with the Charlie Hebdo cartoons, and there was an important debate to be had about the Charlie Hebdo cartoons, and also how we contextualise the fact that maybe their cartoons were bad, but we still grieve for them and their deaths. All these things needed to happen, and the way you facilitate that happening is by showing the cartoons. And if you can't show the cartoons, you can't have that proper debate and discussion. And that's where the wisdom lies in reprinting these. In that we're fine to say don't print offensive things just to offend people because you're a dick. But if there is a value to society and to discussion that's going on in society for you to reprint them, then you should definitely do that. And that was my point with the anti-Semitic cartoons in my speech.
Oh, yeah.
I think one of the things that keeps annoying me is the constant conflation of people and beliefs and ideas. People have rights. Muslims have rights. Jews have rights. Christians have rights. But their beliefs, beliefs or ideas they hold, they don't have some kind of special rights which they have to be insulated and protected. That is, no human race cannot progress if we insulate ideas. All ideas we should be able to put all ideas to test. So when you say, well, you can't say this about Jews, well, I think, you should not denigrate Jews. You should not denigrate Muslims equally. But you can question religion and criticize and, and hold opinion that perhaps believers would not like. So that is one point. Where is the wisdom? And I would say, when you say something like this is something that can never be said, you're basically saying this kind of power can never be challenged. And in this instance, I would say you're saying a power that perhaps religion, or perhaps fundamentalist religion, the one that will go after people and kill them, can never be challenged. this is basically what he's saying, and this in a free society that can't be allowed. But yes, we should protect people, and this is why Europe has hate speech laws to protect people, but not to protect ideas. Now, in United States, they have a different approach. And in the United States, hate speech against groups of people is permitted under the First Amendment. I don't know, is that what possibly we should go that route, and then we would remove this double standard. But Europe has, I think the reason why Europe is different, because yes, we have a history in which Holocaust happened, and these laws, hate speech laws, were introduced as a response to that. But again, to protect people, not to protect ideas.
Helen.
I think it's pretty hard well, first of all, about the national anthem. I think there is still an engagement and a discussion in France about whether or not it should be a thing or not. And while it might be illegal to criticise it, there is still... I mean, I had a primary school teacher who told me I don't like the anthem and explained to me why this was the case. And I think people were just like, also when it was sung during the demonstrations, they were like, we should not talk about bloodshed during this kind of thing, which is totally true. But I think the fact that like we can talk about like the wisdom and why like we should make a choice about like whether we should publish this or not. And I think it's just like because somebody has done it, it engages and it gets people to talk about it, and it gets like so. I take the example of a British newspaper who was like, I'm not publishing this because I think that there should be a responsible freedom of speech and people to talk about it. And we have spoken about this during this debate. And that because other people have published it, that has continued to like have a conversation about that. And I think if that did happen, then it would be there. And because it needs to be there, you need to continue the idea and continue the conversation about it. Otherwise it will die and it will be to no avail for future society. So that's it.
I think if you just look at it, for the Muslims, they'll know exactly what I'm talking about. For non-Muslims, you may find it a bit difficult to understand where I'm coming from. Because if you're a Muslim, you'll be looking at the news, for example, and the problems with Muslims from a much more kind of closer angle than if you're a non-Muslim. You'll just brush over things. If you're a homosexual, you'll be looking for any kind of depiction of homosexuality, whether positive or negative. You'll be far more conscious of it than anybody else. If you're a black person, again, you'll be very conscious of the depiction of how black people are depicted more than anybody else. And so, when we see the depiction of Muslims regularly, a demonization process is taking place, in which there's a drip negative portrayal of Muslims right across the media, in particular right-wing media, and not just in Britain, in the whole of Europe, in fact the West as a whole. What is the consequence of that? Of course, there's a recent survey that for every one positive article that is written about Islam or Muslims, there are at least 20 negative articles. Now, you as non-Muslims, when you are fed with this, and most of it is just sheer distortion of Islam. It is not Islam, it is distortion of Islam. Because, if that was really Islam that you're reading about, forced marriages and honor killing, I'll tell you, me and Abdullah will not be Muslims. That's not Islam. We know that's not Islam. So the point is that you are constantly fed with a distorted image of Islam on a regular basis. Front-page news, etc. In fact, some newspapers have actually made up stories in order to portray Muslims in a negative light, and later on it was found that actually that story had no basis to it. So, one story was about that Muslims had the nativity play in this country banned because in the school because the Muslims objected. Another one said that Muslim doctors refused to wash their hands in hospitals, and of course they were found to be complete nonsense. There was no basis to them, and yet these were front-page news in popular tabloids. So what is the effect of that on you? It is to develop a negative attitude toward Islam, and of course it's worked wonderfully when you look at any surveys of people's attitudes towards Islam and Muslims. It is growing at an alarming rate, a negative portrayal, a negative feeling. These Muslims, they don't belong here, their values are not compatible with Western values, etc. That's the narrative. Now, when you are fed with that narrative, where is it going? Isn't this exactly what happened to the Jews before the Holocaust? A constant negative narrative about them, a demonization process took place. They were described as vermin and all sorts. And so when the Holocaust happened, most Germans, even if they knew what was happening, they turned a blind eye. These people don't belong here, their values are different, they are subhuman. And what we see with this cartoon issue, don't just take the cartoon issue by itself. It is part of that negative narrative that we have a problem with, that we are constantly portrayed. I mean, there was one Muslim philosopher right at the height of the Rushdie affair. Most of you are probably too young to remember that. But I lived through that. And he said something quite interesting. He said, if there ever are concentration camps in the heart of Europe ever again, there is no doubt as to who will be in them. And that is the feeling of Muslims generally, that this is just that constant negative portrayal that is heading in that direction. One could say there's a Joseph Goebbels in most of the right-wing media who's there to portray Muslims negatively. That's how we feel. Whether you agree with that or not, that's a totally different issue. That's how we feel because of that constant negative portrayal. So really, what this issue is about, we're not just against the portrayal of the Prophet Muhammad. We love and respect all the prophets. If Jesus was portrayed in this way, we are equally hurt. If Moses or Abraham were portrayed in this way, we would also be hurt. We love and respect all the prophets of God. In fact, Muslims and Christians picketed cinemas when the Last Temptation of Christ was being shown in the cinemas. Why? Because of our love and respect for Jesus and the negative portrayal of Jesus in that film we were hurt by, and we didn't want people to see it. Recently, the Noah film was actually boycotted in many Muslim countries because of just a portrayal of Noah as a. So try to understand it in a wider context, where we're coming from. So this portrayal is not just about cartoons. This is a general negative portrayal of Muslims. Thank you.
Abdullah, a very short question. The opposition actually, in principle, agrees with us. But they want to win this debate, and they have to use two straw men. The first straw man is that we are arguing for legal bans, which, for the nth time, we're not. So, and it's become a mantra now, every single time we speak. The second straw man is intellectual critique is the same as gratuitous insult, disparaging, and mocking. They're not the same. They are two different things. Now, again, we're not arguing for legal bans, we're arguing for the exercise of personal discretion. That's all we're arguing. And my colleague Lejla agreed. She said, I quote, "We should not denigrate, but we should criticize." I agree. Debate over. So that's exactly what I'm saying. It's exactly what we're saying. If we could, we'd get Locke, Diderot, and Voltaire to be on here, but they don't respond to their emails. The opponents even said they didn't want to bring a magazine. They didn't want to bring a magazine. They exercised their discretion. But notice how them not bringing their magazine or bringing it wouldn't add anything to their argument. You don't have to republish something to make an argument. Right? There was a case where some Nazis in America is more liberal than England and Europe, wanted to march through a Jewish town which had a lot of Holocaust survivors. And people were saying to them, don't do it, it's going to cause tension, it's wrong. No one's denying their right, in America anyway, their right to go to march anywhere they want with this. And are we now going to say, well, in order to be in solidarity with them, let's all have swastikas and jackboots and goose step around? No, right? You don't need to imitate to advocate. And that's the argument that we're positing. And just finally, and just the last point is, I think it's just the final point is, the point of us here today is intellectual persuasion. If you vote for the motion, It's not about saying, now we've all agreed, let's ban. No, what you're saying is, I'm persuaded that in my day-to-day life, I will exercise discretion and consider the context before I analyse the wisdom of any action. That's all you're voting, and that's all we're asking you to vote for. Thanks.
Thank you very much, and thank you for all of your questions. I'm sorry we couldn't answer them all. So now we'll just hear one short summary from each side of the debate, starting with Abdullah, who just heard from, to summarise the case for side proposition.
Okay. Well, I think I'm going to repeat myself on that high. Okay. First and foremost, I just want to thank both proposition side and opposition side for making your cases. I advocate your right to do so, and I'm actually glad that such debates can occur. I'm also happy and thankful for you for attending and listening to both sides of the discussion. I think that such discussions should continue to happen, and so on. I just want to end with one little point. There is one argument which is, they said, for solidarity reasons, we must stand with Charlie Hebdo and say, Je suis Charlie Hebdo, to condemn the attacks. And I said, you don't have to imitate to advocate or to condemn. But I'll say this, the attackers, you won't change their minds with republishing the pictures. You won't change the minds of those who are sympathetic with Charlie Hebdo, and you won't change the minds of those who are not sympathetic, but believe in a peaceful response to Charlie Hebdo. So the point is, other than condemning the killings, which I'm sure we all do, and there's no problem here, there's no problem to condemn vigilantes and condemning, there is no point to reposting on imitating stuff when we can already make the point that killing itself is wrong, and that really is the real issue here, is that killing is wrong, and we all agree with this. So all I argue today is we've been making the point, and some of our opposition has been making this point, is that just because you can do something doesn't mean that you have to do it, and I only argue that we exercise discretion, wisdom, and maybe we'll have a more open-minded world, less cluttered with insults and prejudice, and filled more with wisdom, understanding, and intellectual persuasion. Thank you.
I'd like to invite Jack to finish the case by the proposition and the debate as a whole.
I'll start by also mirroring the comments of my opponent about how good it is that we can all come here and engage in this debate. But we think the proposition's case lies on two straw men themselves, which is first that they are the side of discretion whilst we are the side of manic offence regardless of people's opinions. We think there is value in publishing those, and I'm going to tell you what they are. The other issue is that their claims that there is no value is just fundamentally not true, and that we think it is that we also all agree that you should not offend people when there is no value to doing so. But we do agree that it is wise to say that when there is value to the societal discussion that needs to be taken, to republish the primary articles, that it's an action that we should be taking. So we provided you with a load of reasons why you all deserved as individuals to be able to see these cartoons, because we think it helps the debate that goes on within our society about what Charlie Hebdo was. Charlie Hebdo has a mixed legacy, and it always will do. And we think, fundamentally, under their side, where we don't reprint those cartoons, and we don't show the worst parts of those cartoons, as well as the positive parts of their cartoons, what you result in is a news media which is able to whitewash and lionize Charlie Hebdo as simply another cartoonist who was killed for trying to produce images of the Prophet Muhammad. We think on our side of the house, when everyone actually gets to see those cartoons, you can have a more meaningful discourse surrounding those cartoons and have a better understanding of why they might be offensive or why they might not be. And we think that's the value we provide. We also think we provide value and help for those who are grieving the losses by standing in solidarity with them. And we believe it is meaningful to show to terrorists that you cannot silence journalists and that we will always be there to stand in solidarity with them. We think that does change their tactics, and we think importantly, even if it didn't, it's an important symbolic gesture that we stand in solidarity with those who were murdered, and for those reasons you should vote with the opposition.
Thank you very much, Jack, and a big thank you to all of our speakers tonight. It's been great to have you here, and thank you very much for joining us. So we'll have one last round of applause for our speakers. So, before you all start getting ready to leave, we have the final vote. So just a reminder, as you came in, 62 of you agreed with side proposition, 100 of you agreed with side opposition, and 49 of you weren't sure or voted an abstention. So, bear with me whilst I count you all whilst you put your hands up. It may take me a few minutes. So we can do the same vote again. All of you who would like to raise your hands if you'd like to vote with side proposition, that you think that we should regret the republishing of the Charlie Hebdo cartoons. Lovely, sorry about that. I need a new system, really. If everyone would like to raise their hands if they'd like to vote with side opposition, that you believe that we shouldn't regret the republishing of Charlie Hebdo cartoons, and I will do it again. I'm sure some of you put your hands up twice. And all of those like to put your hands up if you're still not sure in an abstention. Lovely, there's less of you. So, with falling down to 20 of you in abstention, with 66 with side opposition and 85 for side proposition, I will announce that the motion has passed. This House does regret the publishing of the Charlie Hebdo cartoons.